However, I love my job. I love land use law. I'm so grateful I get to work in land use law. It's fascinating and interesting to me, and it's the kind of thing that affects people every day, right? And having said that, I would like to thank all of you for being here, in particular, the planning commissioners and the city council persons who are here, because your job is so important. And I'm going to talk about how important it is, but I honestly don't think people realize how important it is. This is the most important form of government, right here. This is the form of government that affects people's lives every day. I can go my whole week and not worry about what's going on in Washington or even Salt Lake, but what my town is doing affects me, right? And those of you who are here as citizens and who participate in this process and who want to learn and who want to have influence here, you deserve just as much thanks, because citizen involvement is the only way this process works. And so thank you for being here and thank you for being involved. Now, I am here to answer your questions. I was here before a while ago, and as usual, once I leave a place after I've been there, I usually make them 10 times more confused than they were when I got here. And that's okay, I'm used to that. But that's one of the reasons why I like to come back. Is because since the last time I was here, I'm sure questions have evolved and things have happened. And I'm here to answer those questions. And I will stay as long as you have questions, and I will answer any question that you have. I used to bring PowerPoint and show all sorts of slides and everything, and I found that that's not helpful. And the reason why it's not helpful is because tonight I'm in West Haven City, and I don't know what's going on in West Haven City, right? And I could tell you what I think Park City needs to know, and I can tell you what I think Moab needs to know, or Salt Lake needs to know, and this is not any of those places, right? This is West Haven City, and you guys have your own unique situations here, and your own feeling, and your own culture, and your own desires for what you want your town to be, okay? And I'm here to try to tell you how to get that. How to get your town to what you want it to be. Now, having said that, before I answer any questions, I just want to take maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes to create a framework. Okay? I just want to create a framework of expectations. Okay? Because I think once I do that, then as we discuss your questions and your concerns and your issues, and as we discuss what's going on in West Haven City, we'll see how it fits into that framework. And frankly, you'll be amazed, because it does. It fits together. Now, here's the framework. The framework has to do with control. I own land. I assume most of you do. Even the planning commissioners, you own land. We live in America. We love it here. We have a Bill of Rights. We enjoy that. Okay? Our property rights, if you own land, you have property rights, and our property rights, what they are is, I get to do anything I want with my land. I get to do anything I want with my land. That means that if I own land and I want to start a tire fire on that land, I get to.
Not quite.
Well, I hear giggling, and I understand giggling. You're all free to giggle, but that is actually the law. That is actually the law, right? But you got to understand a couple things about that. Okay. First of all, I own land and I get to do anything I want. That means that no one else gets to tell me what I can and cannot do. So, if I want to put a tire fire on my land and my next door neighbor doesn't want me to put a tire fire, as my children constantly say to each other, you're not the boss of me. Right? I get to do what I want. My neighbor doesn't get to tell me what to do. Okay? That's the first thing we understand. However, there is one way, one and only one way to control what other people do on their land. Okay? And that is through the town's ordinances. Through the town's ordinances. That's what they're for. Okay? I said that you can do anything you want in your land, including put on the tire fire. That's true, but we all know that's not the reality. The reality is there's lots of rules what you can and cannot do in your land. Right? But those are the exception to the right. Okay? Just like if you have a right to bear arms doesn't mean you get to carry a gun into the White House. Right? Just like you have a right to free speech, you don't have the right to shout fire in a crowded theater. Okay? You have a property right, you get to do what you want. Okay? But we have an exception to that, and that's we have to follow our city ordinances. Okay? Those are the exception to the rule. So it's not, the ordinances are not what's in control. The property right is what's in control. The ordinances are exceptions. The ordinances are restrictions put on that right. Okay? All of this, I'm not making this up. All of this comes from the United States Supreme Court case. It's out of the village of Euclid in Ohio. The village of Euclid, a long time ago, didn't have any zoning ordinances, and the town decided to put some zoning ordinances in place. And they got sued by some citizens who said exactly that. They said, this is my land. You don't have a right to tell me what I can do on my land. You can't tell me that on this land I have to have residential, and on that land over there I can have commercial. Or you can't tell me how high my house can be. Or you can't tell me what my building can be used for, if I want to put cattle in there, if I want whatever else I want to do. And that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said exactly that. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You have this land, and you have the right to do anything you want with it. Okay? But you know what? We're going to allow this exception of ordinances. Right? In order to live in an ordered society, we got to have order. Right? We all want a nice place to live. And if we just let everybody do what they want, it's not going to be nice for very long. Right? So we have to have order. So we allow zoning ordinances to come in, right, as a way to control and make the town nice and make things beautiful and everything. Okay? But still, underneath that, with the exception of those ordinances, I can do what I want with my land. The reason why that's important, again, it's about control. It's about control. It is very tempting to tell people what to do on their land. It's very tempting to see what somebody wants to do and say no to that. You can't do that. Or, I don't want my neighbor doing this. Or, if this guy does this, it'll hurt my property values. Or, if there's this road over here, crime will come in and all that kind of stuff. So it's very tempting to do that. You need to understand there's only one way. Only one way to do that. Only one way. The only way we tolerate in this country the impingement of our property rights to tell us what we can and cannot do. And that is through the local government's ordinances. Ordinances. Those are the laws that are passed. The actual laws that are written down. It's not the local government's preferences. It's not the local government's feelings. It's the ordinances that they pass. And they have to write them down. If you don't write them down, they're not a law. And if they're not a law, you can't tell people that they have to follow them. It's through the ordinances. That's how we work in America. Okay? We're a country of laws. Okay? We elect people to make our laws. Okay? We don't all vote on every law that gets made. We don't all just get together and do that kind of stuff. There's ways to do that, but that's not what we do. What we do is we elect people, and the people go into the legislative body, right? And they make the laws, and they discuss them, and they make them, and hopefully they represent our interests. And if they don't represent our interests, we vote for somebody else, right? We get them kicked out of office, right? But that's how we do this. And the same thing happens right here, okay? You have your city council, right, that you voted for, that you elected, and they are your representatives, and you, through voting for them, have given them the power to make laws. You've given them the power to tell you what you can and cannot do on your land. You have elected them and made them your boss about what you can and cannot do. But you're not going to just let them do it just according to their mood. They have to actually make the law. They have to actually make the ordinance. That's the framework. If you've seen any of my videos, or if you've ever heard me talk before, you've heard me talk about the kinds of decisions that are made in a local government. Legislative and administrative decisions are the main ones that we talk about. Legislative and administrative decisions. That's all I'm just trying to explain to you. Okay? Every time, tonight, just with the Planning Commission here, I saw several legislative decisions made and several administrative decisions made. Okay? Legislative decisions make law, right? The Planning Commission doesn't actually make law, but they recommend laws to the council, right? Because the council, they're the elected officials and they get to make the law. They make the law. Those are policy decisions, and those are the decisions where you're telling people what they can and cannot do. Administrative decisions are not like that. Administrative decisions apply the law. Okay? So, you know, we had a couple things here tonight about subdivisions, right? And you had your subdivision code, and there were a couple questions. Did this person follow the steps? Did this person do the thing that they were supposed to do? You're just applying the law to that person. And if they follow the law, they get to have their subdivision, or they get to have their conditional use permit, as long as they follow the law. Right? You're not, at that point, you're not telling people what they can and cannot do. Right? You're taking that legislative part of those ordinances and you're applying them to a particular person. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. And the reason why I just want to make that clear up front, not because of anything I'm concerned about here, I just think that's the fundamental framework to local government that you need to understand. And that is, it's about power and control. It's about, we have given someone power and control over us, over our land. Okay? But that's how we do it in America, right? But that group that has that power and control has limitations. They have to make a law in order to tell us what we can and cannot do. They have to actually make an ordinance, and then they have to follow it, just like citizens have to follow it. And if that's the case, everything should work out hunky-dory. That's my rant. How was that for a rant? Pretty good? Excellent. Is it clear? Do you have any questions about the actual part? Okay.
We have a question in the back here.
Yes. Hi.
However, if the ordinances that are in place do not represent what the citizens in the city want to see, can't the city council go back and change those ordinances?
Well, that's the beautiful part about it, is yes. Okay? When you're talking about a legislative decision, you're talking about a policy decision, you're talking about changing the law according to the policies. And that's one of the reasons why we have elections so often. Okay? Because if we don't like what someone's doing, we get them out and put somebody else in there who will do what we want them to do. And there is no prohibition about creating those laws, about the amount of time in between or anything like that. If there's a law that the city doesn't like, that the citizens don't like, that you don't like, you go to your council people and you tell them, right? And then they weigh all the decisions that have to come along with that and all the factors and everything, and then they decide to change it. And you know what? If the next day you want to do that again and go to them again and have them change it again, you can do that and they can do that. But that's the beauty part of it. It's a policy decision, and it's almost unlimited discretion to do that, which ought to scare you a little bit. Okay, when you talk about the government and you talk about unlimited, right? We don't like that. You know, limited government is better, or if not limited government, at least government that can't go crazy on us, right? And remember, we have the Bill of Rights to protect us from government, right? So that means that the Bill of Rights exists to protect us from Mayor Bolos, because you know what she's like. She's not like that kid.
So the other side of that, so if I'm a landowner and my property is already in the master plan or zoned under this certain zoning,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden it's worth, in my mind, it's worth this amount of money, the zone what it is now.
Yeah.
But the neighbors don't like what is zoned.
Yeah.
And they want to make my property not worth as much by rallying all the neighbors up and saying, hey, I want this. We should get together and make this not be commercial or multi-use or whatever. And now they get together and tell the elected officials we want that changed. Now my property's not worth as much. How does that work?
Well, first of all, let me ask you a question. See if this is a quiz. Under the law, how many people do you have to have at city council meeting in order to get a law changed?
One. City council, I thought it was that one person to come up to the city council.
Yeah. You have to have a majority of the city council, that's all. Right? So the city council can change the law without any citizen input if they'd like to. They can listen to citizen input if they like to. They can ignore citizen input if they like to. And that's all there is to it. So you like your zone, right? And the neighbors don't like the zone, and the neighbors go and complain, and they complain. It's a question of persuasion, okay? You'll go to the city council, you say, leave it that way, and your neighbors will go to the city council and say, this is how we want it. And the neighbors say, 200 people have come to me and said, we want to change, and one guy doesn't want to change. We're going to side with the one guy and not change it. And the 200 people say, you do that, and we'll sue you. They'll lose that lawsuit. They'll flat out lose that lawsuit. They might get voted out of office. That's the implication there. Having said that, to get to the real nub of your question, yeah, the city council can change your zone anytime you want. They don't have to have the neighbors even give you the input. If they want to change the zoning around your property, they can, including downzoning. They have that ability. And again, when I talk about that power that they have, that's why it should scare you. Because they have that ability to do that. And there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. We have multiple cases in Utah that say that a citizen does not have a right to a zone. Whatever your zoning is, you don't have a right to that. If someone takes that away from you, you have not lost a right. They have not taken anything from you. That's the major risk in real estate development, is that the zoning might change or might not change. So I mean, I know that doesn't give you a lot of comfort, but that's where it is. That's the level of discussion that exists. Yes, sir.
If a city council changes the zoning or changes an ordinance, how soon does that take effect?
Well, the city council, when they make that change, they should say when it takes effect. Okay? Often they don't go, and that's okay, but at that point it would pretty much take effect as soon as the decision is final. And the decision is not necessarily final after the vote. The decision is usually final after it's been signed. You know, they got it all drafted up and got it in the book, and they said ordinance number whatever, and the mayor signs it, bam. It's final. But that can happen quickly. That can happen that day. It can. There's no real space there. Yeah.
So while you're on the subject, is it the city council or is the planning commission take part in recommendations for zoning as well? Because from my understanding, that's one of the purposes of having the planning commission.
That is exactly correct. Okay, this zoning and this stuff and this level of power that I'm talking about, and how it affects people so much. Okay, but that's why planning commissions even exist. Is they exist because this is so important that we need two sets of eyes looking at it. So the council cannot make a zone change the zoning, or make an amendment to the ordinances or anything that's legislative without planning commission recommendation. They don't have to follow that, right? They can do, but they have to actually get a recommendation from the planning commission. Once they do that, they can pretty much do what they want. But that's important because that's why the planning commission exists. They exist to plan. They exist to help and to guide and to look into these things really deeply, because the city council has all that to worry about, plus a whole bunch of other things to worry about. But the planning commission should just be focused on that.
So along those same lines,
Yep.
you have the city council and you have the planning commission. Are either one of those obligated to zone and approve a certain zoning? For example, mixed-use zoning. Say the mixed-use zoning is in the city's general plan.
Mm-hmm.
Is the planning commission and the city council obligated or forced to use mixed-use zoning? Or if, say, the citizens of the city recommend that they would prefer like R4 instead, is there like an ordinance or a law, state law, saying that they have to use mixed use because it was in the city plan?
That's a great question. The answer is no. There is never the city council never has an obligation about the zoning. About other things they do, okay? But the zoning is always discretionary. They can change the zoning. The plan, the city plan, is advisory, purely. It has no effective law, okay? What that means is that a smart city will follow its plan, but there's no legal obligation to. And sometimes your plan maybe was created in one way, and there's another way that's actually even better that you didn't think of. And so you deviate from the plan that way. But usually you want your plan, you want to follow it, but there's absolutely no obligation to do it. Just like there's no obligation to follow what everyone here in the room is yelling about.
Yes, so there's no legal obligation either way, per se.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So if I'm a city councilman and I decided, hey, we've got all these apartments being built, I don't want to see any more show up. So I'm just gonna vote no on every apartment that comes through.
Yeah.
That's okay?
That is okay as long as you don't mind getting sued and losing. Remember, because what you're telling people is you're telling people what they can and cannot do on the land, and I told you there's only one way to do that, and that's in your ordinances.
So if I'm a city councilman and I don't want to see more ordinance, and you have changed, recommended the ordinance to be changed, and there are no more apartments being built.
That's how you do it. That's how you do it. Once you start when people come and making applications to you, okay, when someone comes with like a conditional use application or building permit or subdivision application, those are administrative, and your only question at that time is, does this comply with our ordinance? If it complies, you say yes. So if your ordinance says apartments are allowed, and someone comes with an application for apartments, you say yes. You don't have that discretion. You have the discretion to change the ordinance, though. And so you can say, I don't want any more apartments, let's change the ordinance and take apartments out. That you can do. And then you have no problem.
So let's clarify that a little bit. So you're talking about if it's already zoned for apartments and then they say, no, I don't want no apartments, so I'm not going to approve apartments. So take the instance where, say it's zoned for agricultural, and they come in and request a rezone that's in the general plan that would allow apartments, then what you said about the rezone being discretionary seems like that would apply.
Well, it does. Okay. Here's how it works. I'll try to give it a good example. So you have a farmer in an agricultural zone. The agricultural zone allows homes and not much else. Okay. Farmer's old. He wants to be done farming. None of his kids wants to farm, so he, if he wants to, go on a tour to Israel or something, so he wants a little money. So he comes to the town and he says, I want to build apartments. Okay? And he makes an application for apartments. Says, I want apartments. And so you look at that application for apartments and you look at the zoning and you say, your zoning doesn't allow apartments, sir. Right? So, and my only question here is, does your application comply with the zoning? It doesn't allow apartments, so no. I've turned you down. You do not get apartments. Have a nice day. Well, he gets wise, right? So he comes back later and he says, I want a zone change. I want to add apartments to the zoning so that then I can have apartments, okay? And he comes and makes that application, and he's here, and there's 50 people on the other side of the room that don't want apartments. And so you listen to them all, and you consider it, and you say, well, you know what? We're going to allow apartments here. So thank you, all you 50 people, for coming. We appreciate you caring about your community, but this is a good spot for apartments. So yes, we are going to change the zone. At that point, they've exercised their zoning discretion. Okay? Then, after that, the guy comes in with an application, the exact same application, right, for apartments, and you look at that and you say, does this comply with our ordinance? Now it does, because now the zoning allows apartments. So the answer is yes. At that point, there's no discretion. The discretion comes at the legislative stage, at the creating law stage, at the zoning stage. It doesn't come at the application stage where this guy's coming in and asking for apartments. If it doesn't comply, you say no, and if it complies, you say yes.
Conversely, if you decide that you're going to listen to the 50 people that don't want apartments and you say we're rejecting your zoning request, that would be within the purview of the city council.
Absolutely. Same. Either way. The only time the zoning decision gets overturned, the only time the city decides to change the zone or amend an ordinance that gets overturned, is if it's illegal. Okay? You probably have heard me and other people say the phrase arbitrary, capricious, and illegal. Right? That's the legal standard. If someone sues you because of a decision you made, if someone sues the city for a decision, that's what the court's going to say. The court's going to look at whether or not that's arbitrary, capricious, and illegal. Okay? For a zone change, for a legislative act, a zone change, okay, arbitrary, capricious is such a low standard that no one has ever won. Ever. Okay? The standard for that is reasonably debatable. Is it reasonably debatable that that is in the best interest of the city to make that zone change? reasonably debatable. All you gotta do is look somebody straight in the face and say, I think that's the best thing to do. Right? No one wins that. If it's illegal, which means that it is in direct conflict with some other law, then the zone change can get overturned. That's really rare, but it usually only happens if the decision does something that directly conflicts with state law, because then state law is superior. So that's the thing. That's the level of discretion you have for those legislative acts. Okay, for the administrative acts, okay, you're looking at whether or not it complies or doesn't comply, and that's it. So what you got is you've got a huge amount of discretion on the legislative side and almost none on the administrative side. That's why I said at the very beginning that you need to think about the amount of power that people have here. You can make just about any decision about people's land, and it affects them hugely. You can even include downzoning people, make their land less valuable, and you get to do that. But you need to exercise that with great caution, sir.
Can you explain regulatory taking?
Yeah, I can actually. Are you an attorney?
Sorry, what?
Are you an attorney?
I'm not. I've heard the term.
Yeah. I know, usually only attorneys have heard that term. Or at least people who have been in government for a while. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about property rights, okay, I'm talking about the law against takings. Okay, the United States and the Utah Constitution both say that the government will not take private property for public use without just compensation. Okay, there's two ways that the takings can happen. Right, the government can just come in and take your land. Like they can come in and they say, "Get out! We now own this. We're going to park all of our vehicles here. We're going to live in your house." All that kind of stuff. You know what? If they want to do that, they get to, right? As long as it's for a public purpose and they pay you. Okay? Wow. But the other side of that coin is what's called a regulatory taking. And that's where the government didn't want to physically possess your land, but they created laws that made it so it's just the same. Made it so they might as well have come and taken your land. That's where the local government has created rules that say you can't do anything on your land. Right? And they've completely taken away all of your rights to do stuff. Okay? Once that happens, it's treated exactly the same as if the government had come and kicked you out of your house. Okay? The government has to buy your land. Okay? And that's all what we're trying to do here as far as these laws go. I told you that the Supreme Court said that we'll accept local ordinances as an exception to the rule. Well, they put a limit on that, and the limit is, but you can't go too far. You can restrict what people can and cannot do on their land, but you cannot go too far. And that is the actual legal phrase that we lawyers, spend a lifetime trying to understand what it means and interpret. Right? But that's the standard that you're held to as a city. Okay? You can't create a zoning ordinance here. You can restrict people's land, but you can't go too far. Because when you go too far, when you've given too many restrictions, when you've taken away too much, that's a taking, and you have to buy it. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And the same thing goes for, this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about as far as only ordinances are the only way you can tell people what they can and cannot do. Because once you start to say to people, no, you can't do that. And the ordinance doesn't say you can't do it, you just can't. Like the example with the apartments. I'm just sick of apartments, so I'm going to say no to you from now on. Once you start doing that, you're in your regulatory taking territory. You've started to do something unconstitutional, and you're starting to take the land. So what regulatory taking is the taking of land without just compensation by regulation, by the ordinances and the rules you set up that are so restrictive that it takes away people's rights. It's got to go pretty far. Go too far, it means far. Just because somebody downzoned you doesn't make it a regulatory taking. Just because you want to build a 7-Eleven on your land and they won't let you. They passed a rule that says you can't do that. None of that makes it a taking just because you can't do what you want. They have to wipe you out pretty much. But it happens sometimes. It happens. People are all like, I'm sick of Tyler goes in the city. So we're gonna pass a law that says no more building, no more growth, no more development. When that happens, lawyers start to salivate because you're talking about a regulatory taking. When it happens.
Can you give a kind of concrete example of regulatory taking, like an instance that would be considered that?
It's easier to start with what it isn't. Okay. There's a case out of Sandy City where there was a shopping center or it wasn't a shopping center. It was just a big piece of property that was zoned for a shopping center, right? And the guy had it appraised, and it appraised for like $500,000. I don't remember the exact number, but it appraised for like $500,000. And then the city changed the zone and downzoned him. So he couldn't have a shopping center anymore. He had to do other things with it. And he sued the city. And he said, this is a regulatory taking. That land was worth $500,000, and now I've had another appraisal done, and it's worth $200,000, right? I lost $300,000, more than half the value of the land, because they downzoned me. And the court said, no taking. That's not a taking. Government does things that affect your property value all the time. If it goes up, you don't have to pay them. If it goes down, they don't have to pay you, as long as it doesn't reach that level of taking. So we know that it's not injuring somebody to that point, okay? It's still not a taking. If they had zoned it down to the point where the only thing that you could do on it is allow Boy Scouts to camp, okay? That probably would have been a taking, because that's going too far. That's wiping out completely wiping them out, preventing them from doing anything, right? But farming is something, okay? So if all you're allowed to do on your property is farm, your property probably is not taken. You know, you really have to make it impossible for people to do stuff on their land. So you create a zone that says that you have to have a 5-acre size lots, okay? And everybody already has lots in that area. A bunch of people already have lots in that area that are 4 acres, okay? And so basically what your rules are saying is you can't do anything because you don't have 5 acres. You now have all these 4-acre chunks that are worthless, okay? Those people probably will win a regulatory taking lawsuit. Yes, ma'am.
So what would be the proper ways that a government or a city or a county would go about properly taking, like, say, private property owners' property and using it for public use or...
That process is eminent domain.
Eminent domain?
Yeah, it's called eminent domain. And there's a process, and it's complicated.
Would they have to notify a resident if they were to take pieces of their property?
Well, yes.
What happens if they don't?
Then they don't get to take it. Just plain old, they plain old don't get to take it.
What happens if they do it anyways?
Then the property owner is going to sue them for taking it when. You got to understand that the taking we're talking about is also called inverse condemnation. Eminent domain is condemnation. It's where you condemn land. We need a wider road. That happens all the time, everywhere. Sometimes you got a wider road, okay? Which means I need 10 feet of your front lawn, okay? So I'm either going to do one of two things. I'm either just going to build the pavement on that 10 feet and flip the bird at you as I ride by on my motorcycle. Or I'm going to go to you and I'm going to explain to you that we need 10 more feet and talk to you about how much it's worth and how much I should pay you and go through the process and I'll do a checklist of all the things I have to do, right? Well, if I do it that way, that's the eminent domain process, that's condemnation, and you end up paying what you're doing and everyone's happier, right? If you do it the other way, if you just pave, okay, then you're going to lose a lawsuit for taking. And, you're going to end up paying and it becomes a mess and there's other constitutional implications that are really hard. Sir.
So the rise in high-density housing in West Haven, we've heard that is due to the city trying to adhere to rules, whereby if they adhere to rules in regards to a mix of large lots and high-density lots, that they're going to get some kind of federal grant money in order to build infrastructure.
Okay.
is this true? And if it is there a possibility the city could just say, no, we don't want your federal infrastructure money, we just want to have nice 1 acre lots out here, and we'll figure out a way to build around the sewers and whatever else we would use that money for?
Okay, so this is how it works. In the Utah State Code, there is a list of 26 things that are meant to encourage not high-density housing, that are meant to encourage low-income housing, okay? Because that's the real crunch. We have high-density housing, but it's just as expensive to get into than a house, right? And so the lower-income people, are out in the cold even, and that's the case. So there's a list of 26 things that every community has to do, three things that you can pick 3 things off of that menu of 26 things, okay? Increasing density is one of them because it does help, but there's some other things, right? But they have to pick 3 things, and I don't have the list of 26 memorized, but they are things like changing the zoning in some places to allow higher density is one of the things you can allow. One of the things you can do to check this on the zone. You can permit mother-in-law apartments, right? So you can, or accessory dwelling buildings, so that every house can have another house in the backyard. That's another thing you can do as part of your choosing those 3 things, okay? If you do not show that you're doing those 3 things, you will not get, what's the fund called? TIF funds. And it's just Transportation Infrastructure Fund, okay? So, yeah, you can choose to say no to the TIF funds and not do any of those things. You do have that right to do that, okay? Some people might go that way, right? But if you ask me, that's nuts, because the transportation infrastructure funds, you don't have those, and you don't have any ability to keep up your roads, to build new roads, to put in transportation. Something breaks and it has to come out of the city general fund to fix. But you can make that choice. But the transportation infrastructure funds are a big deal. And
So
there's
it's
a lot of money.
compelling enough that cities would be crazy not to take the money?
Yeah, I could see some places, maybe rural places whose roads never change, or maybe places where, residents have a bunch of money and there's a ton of money in the general fund. That's not most places. But yeah, that money, you can choose to not take it if you want to, and not do any of those things. But you only have to do 3 of the things on the menu, yeah.
Where can we find that list of 26?
It's in the Transportation Code. No,
It's 34.
it's not in Title 10.
It's number 34.
Senate Bill 34, because it was just passed this year. I'm just trying to think of where it was put in the code. Looking at Senate Bill 34 from last year. Honestly, most places, it's hard to say most places, but I would still say most places already do realize that lower income housing is important. Okay, because it really is. You got to have all types of people. You have all types of jobs. My parents run a dairy farm. I don't know what they would do without people who are willing to work for very little money. And my parents provide housing for them because they need somewhere to live. So most places already have things that they're doing to meet to pick the 3 things off the menu. So for most places, it hasn't been a big deal. So.
I think one of those is also any other thing that the city can come up with that will provide those opportunities for that broad range of housing. It could be something like rent control, which is not in that list.
Yeah, you can choose those kinds of things. There is a broad one at the end, like there always is a list like that. As in, here's our list, but if you have something that works just as well, great. So yeah, you can do that. As far as density goes, again, that is not meant to increase density. Everywhere I go, people don't like density. Okay? People want things to stay wide open and farmland and stuff like that. But you have to understand how critical low-income housing is. It's critical. The economy depends on it. It relies on it. And so the whole purpose of that ordinance, that statute, was to make local governments take action on it instead of just saying, let somebody else handle all the low density.
How,
Hold on, this one's first, sorry.
how do you define, affordable housing or low-income
That was
housing?
my question too.
It's complicated. I mean, there's statistics and a formula and all that kind of stuff. And you don't have to answer the question, you just have to pick 3 of the things off the list.
And if I'm not mistaken, we go off of Ogden.
That's what I was wondering.
No,
Is,
no, they changed it. We go off
oh,
of
did they
West
change
Haven.
it?
Yeah, we go off of West Haven.
So it's just based off the whole community as a whole, and then percentages and whatnot?
Again, there's not a requirement that you have a certain amount of low-density housing. The requirement is that you pick 3 things that encourage low-density housing. Or not low-density, sorry, low-income housing. There's not a requirement that you actually have it in low-income housing, you just have to pick those 3.
Just do things that encourage it. Now, whether they end up being actually affordable is a different story.
But, I mean, I wouldn't do things, I wouldn't pick things and then with the intention of not having them result in
Well, yeah.
unaffordable housing, because then it will fly and won't be a tip month.
Who provides oversight for that? Who checks up on you to make sure you're doing what you say you're supposed to be doing? In terms of you take the money, but did you actually build the low-income housing?
There's two ways to answer that question. Officially, it's the people who give out the tip funds, right? Officially, but that's not what's going to happen in reality. What's going to happen in reality is it's going to be like these commissions, like the Affordable Housing Coalition that they have. There's several groups like that. They're going to be the ones to police it, really. So, yeah, please.
If the division, the Department of Workforce Services is who you have to turn the report into, and they follow up on compliance.
Yeah. We'll see how it works out because it's brand new. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah.
We have a general plan and other plans that we put a lot of time into for the city and taken a lot of public comment and have come up with a general plan and other ones. And earlier you had said that, there's a lot of leeway and whatnot, but a smart city will follow their plan. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about why it's important to follow that plan, why be smart.
Well, I mean, the simplest way to answer that question is, came in the question, and that is, you took a lot of time. You took a lot of citizen comment, right? Here's the thing about it is you're allowed to make West Haven into the city you want it to be, right? And this whole process is meant to give you tools to do that. Tools to make West Haven, if you want it to be a rural place, if you want it to have, over here have a lot of commercial, and over here have a lot of open space. It's meant to give you those tools, right? And so you plan that. You plan that in advance. You look and see, what do we want, right? And you take comments from citizens, and you look at, the areas and what's going on around you and everything, and you create this plan, okay? So, you have the time and the leisure to do that then, okay? But when it comes right down to it, are you going to take that much time every time you have a decision to make? You're not. You're not. That's why you plan. Having said that, though, like I said, things change. I mean, I know of plenty of places where they've planned something for a certain area, and nothing really happened there for a while, but they still like the plan. But all around them in other cities, lots of things happened, right? They kind of made what they had planned there not really work anymore, right? So they changed the zoning to something that works, right? Or they went and changed their plan, right? That happens. That happens, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly legal to do, right? But you took the time to make a plan. You listened to citizen comments, and you tried to design a city that looks like what you want West Haven to be, right? So why not follow it? That's why I say the smart thing to do is to follow that plan. Not always, but generally. So, having said that, too, there's no way that I've ever seen to make everybody happy. Am I right about that, planning commissioners? Listen to me, planning commissioners, listen. You're doing this voluntarily, right? I mean, you weren't elected, no one forced you to do this. Talk about a hateful, thankless job. I mean, you cannot go from one end of this town to the other sometimes without having planning commissioners getting wild and reviled and stuff like that. And they're just, teachers and librarians and farmers and store managers and stuff like that who are just trying to help their city, And man, it gets tough. It gets tough because you cannot make everybody happy. There's always some people or a faction of people who think what you did was wrong or unfair or unjust or unethical. It's a hard job. And all you can do is just do your best to try to make the city into what you want it to be. And then if someone doesn't like it, then they can be on the planning commission. See how that goes. That's all? Yeah.
So a hypothetical situation, starting back to the framework. Say
Which
the
are
planning-
always never hypothetical, but yeah, go ahead.
The Planning and Zoning Commission gets together in 2 weeks. They decide to come up with a recommendation for the general plan and to change zoning. The following week, council gets together. They decide we're getting rid of mixed use. They take a vote, majority wins.
Get less and less hypothetical all the time.
Okay, so at that point, when mixed use would stand is no longer correct. Is that how the timeline would work? Okay. The builders that have permits to build all these high-density housing, are they still legally able to build on that? Where does that line get drawn?
Great question. That's a great question. In Utah, we have what's called early vesting. And what that means is, that when people ask me what exactly my property rights are, okay, I tell them, your property rights are to do whatever you can do on your land that's legal. That's legal. Okay, that's important. Okay? But what that means is that if something is legal to do on my land, I have a right to do it. Okay? But I just told you that zoning can change and no one has a right to their zone. Okay? So you have to figure out where to draw that line. And this is where we decided to draw it in Utah. It's called early vesting. So what happens is if I have a right to do something on my land, and I bring an application to the city to do that thing, build apartments, for example, okay? And as I told you, your only question is, does this comply with our zoning, okay? But you realize as soon as this application comes in that you don't want apartments there. You absolutely don't want apartments anywhere in that area, okay? It just doesn't work in that area, right? But it's allowed, okay? Well, I told you that if the guy comes in and he asks for something that is legal, you say yes. Does this comply with our ordinance? You say yes. So you say yes to that guy, to his apartments, okay? Then you go to a planning commission meeting as fast as you can, and you start the process of amending the zone to take out apartments. Take apartments out. And it goes through the exact process you talked about, and it goes to the council, and the council amends the zone, right? That guy who got his application in, while it was legal, vested, which means he gets to have his apartments, okay? Because he gave the line is at the time of application. If I make application, the day I make application, whatever the law says on that day, that's what I get to do, okay? But you can change it, and that means that everyone else who wants to do apartments after that, you can say no to, right? But you say yes to that guy because at the time he made application, he vested, and he gets to go ahead with his application. So, as far as the mixed-use zoning goes, yeah, anybody who's got that, who has made application before it changed to take out the mixed use, they get to go. They get to do what they had planned to do because they vested, because they applied at the time that it was legal.
Then we can do like a moratorium, right? Like a 90-day, how long is it? Like if you wanted to, for future applicants, right? Well, because it'll take time to get the process.
Okay, first of all, I'll just tell you, as a matter of personal preference, I think moratoriums are forward. There's a better way. I think I talked about this last time I was here, but yes, they are legal. And what a moratorium is it's where you say, we're going to pass an emergency ordinance that says that for 6 months, it's 6 months, we are not going to allow such and such thing to happen. Okay? So for 6 months, no apartments. Right? And you put that moratorium in place. You have 6 months to figure out what you're going to do in that time. At the end of the 6 months, you have to start accepting applications again. Right? The reason why I think there's a better way is because of what's called the pending ordinance rule, which works in a lot the same way, but it's a lot tighter legally, and it's a lot less likely to be challenged. And what that is like in the process I described, somebody comes in with an application for apartments, you suddenly realize you don't want apartments, so you go to the planning commission and start the process. As soon as you start that process, then that ordinance becomes pending, right? And it's still a 6-month period, but you have 6 months to pass that ordinance, during which time you do not have to accept applications for apartments. So it seems, they work the same way. It seems like splitting hairs, but that's what I do on attorney split hairs. But in any event, yeah, I mean, you can do that. You can start an ordinance be pending and stop it in that way.
Theoretically, could you just continue this pending process indefinitely?
In 6 months.
Just curious.
Yeah, it's a good question. I get asked that all the time.
Could you? I mean, you could just.
No, you get 6 months.
Okay.
I don't have any authority for this. And what that means is that there's been no cases that have told us this, anything, but I'm going to tell you my suspicion. My suspicion is if you have a moratorium or a pending ordinance and somebody makes application during that time, at the end of that 6 months, that application vests. Just like that. They don't have to come and make application again and the ordinance is done. So you have to have it, you actually have to have it taken care of by the 6 months. That's it, that 6 month time ends and all these applications are vested.
So to be very clear, if you already have a mixed-use ordinance and you make the decision that you're going to change that or rewrite that ordinance,
right?
Unless you pass another ordinance, that would be the moratorium, which is a temporary ordinance, you're operating under the pending ordinance.
Correct. Once it's on an agenda, on the planning commission agenda, saying we're going to look at changing the mixed-use ordinance. Once that happens, it's pending. And you have 6 months from that time till 6 months is over to get that ordinance actually changed. And during that time, you do not have to accept applications for the mixed use.
So going back kind of to the early vesting concept.
Yep.
So somebody puts in their application, but the zoning has not changed yet. So say it's agricultural at this point, their application is in. Part of that application is a request to change it to mixed use.
Mm-hmm.
Does that application count as early vesting as far as, oh, we have to make it mixed use because that was the request at the application time? Or would it be early vesting only really apply to the zoning that was applicable at the time they made that application?
The early vesting only applies to the zoning that was applicable at the time, but the vesting rule only applies to administrative decisions, right? Applications, right? The zoning decisions, again, wide open discretion, right? And you don't vest in zoning. You make an application, just because you made an application for zoning change does not give you the right to have the zoning change, ever. So if you're making a kind of application that has both, I want the zoning change to mixed use, and then I want to have mixed use permit, right? Well, those are really two different decisions. One is legislative to change the zoning, right? And full discretion. One is the permit, which will depend on the first one, whether or not they grant the first one. If they don't grant the first one, you say no to the permit. If they do grant the first one, you say yes to the permit. Simple as that. See, it's easy, isn't it? Just running the town stuff. Yeah. That's right. That's why you guys volunteered for this job. I want to make sure that your questions are answered clearly, that when you leave here, you're going to leave here as friends and not throw rocks at each other You can throw rocks at me, I'm cool. Fine with that.
So what are the steps to get rid of the mixed zoning, mixed use zoning?
Well, the best way I can answer that is to say that there's two ways. I've only found two ways in this world to get people to do anything, like change the zoning or anything. And one is to force them to, and one is to get them to want to. Okay? And all this time we've been talking about this legislative discretion about changing zoning. Right? It is purely a get them to want to thing because, as I said, the discretion is there, so there's no legal way to force them. Right? You get them to want to. Okay? So when you talk about the procedure, if you want to get rid of the mixed-use zoning, the procedure is you start talking to your city council persons. And you start making sure that they understand how important it is, and you do it, you use a persuasive approach. This is the reasons why we should get rid of this. Okay? And you can make an application to change the zoning, to get rid of the mixed use or whatever you want, or you can have somebody else make the application, or the council can start the process on their own, right? But your job as a citizen, if you want to get rid of that, is to persuade them to, okay? And so you talk to them, and you come to the meeting, and you speak, and you express your concerns, and you send them emails, and you harass them until they get you arrested as a stalker, or whatever. But you're taking a persuasive approach. At the end of the day, the council is going to have a decision. Should we get rid of the mixed-use zoning, or do we not get rid of the mixed-use zoning? And if they agree with you and they get rid of the mixed-use zoning, grant. If they don't agree with you and they don't get rid of the mixed-use zoning, then you don't vote for that guy next time.
As you already alluded to, you talk about, coming up and doing public speaking and when we have public hearings and so on, and how we kind of get hammered most of the time. Will you talk about public clamor and what we're supposed to consider and not, so that they understand why we make the decisions sometimes that we do?
Absolutely, and this is another reason why it's important to understand the distinction between a legislative decision and an administrative decision. Okay, because it's different. Okay? Again, a legislative decision is a decision that makes the law. It's a decision that changes the zoning or amends something in the code, even one word, right? If it changes something in the law, it's a legislative decision, right? That's when citizen involvement is most valuable, okay? Because that's when the planning commission and the council, for that matter, can listen to and be influenced by whatever you want to tell them, whatever you want to use to persuade them, whatever information that you have, they can. They can make that decision because they feel like they heard from 20 people and 20 people all said no. And so they can make that legislative decision on that basis. Okay? That's the time for you to express yourselves to the planning commission, to the council. The problem is that's not what happens. The problem is you have a law, right? And no one thinks twice of it. You may change the law, no one thinks twice about that until someone comes with an actual application. So somebody comes with an application for apartments, right? And everybody comes to the planning commission meeting, and everyone yells and screams and shakes their fist because they don't want apartments there, right? But they don't understand, as I said, if it says you get to have apartments, you get to have apartments. There's no discretion at that point. The planning commission and the council don't have the ability at that point to say, oh, I'm sorry, even though apartments are perfectly legal where you want to build them, we're going to say no to you. They don't get to do that. That's a lost lawsuit right there. That's what's called, that's public clamor, okay? Now, when it comes to those kinds of decisions, okay, you need to understand what the council or the commission can be influenced by and can't be influenced by. They cannot be influenced by clamor. They can be influenced by evidence. Because their decision needs to be backed up by evidence. It doesn't have to be much evidence, but there has to be evidence to back up their decision. And this is for an administrative purely, understand, an administrative purely. And what the evidence is evidence that it complies with our statutes. Evidence that it complies with our statutes. Okay? So, quiz time. Okay? Somebody, you know, you guys, I know mixed uses are a big deal here, but I want to keep going to apartments because it's more concrete and it's less, you know, getting deep into what you guys are dealing with. So say someone comes with an application for apartments. People don't want apartments, so they all come to planning commission meeting. And they line up, okay? I'm going to tell you what some of the people say, and I want you to tell me whether what they said is clamor or evidence. Okay? If you approve this apartment building, it will increase traffic in my neighborhood, and children will get hit by cars. That's clamor. That's not evidence of anything. That proves nothing. Okay? How about if we just skip the children? If you approve this in our neighborhood, it will increase traffic in our neighborhood. It's still clamor.
You have to prove it through traffic.
No quantitative data.
They'd have to be rented out.
Exactly right. Remember, the evidence is facts. It's not opinions. It's not, you know, big if-thens. It's not things I'm worried about. Okay, here's another one. If you approve this, my property values will go down. Do people have a right to their property value?
No.
Oh,
No.
You do not have a right to your property.
Oh, yeah.
It's shown, legal precedent says they can downzone you.
As I said before, yeah. Very nice. Government, like I said, does things all the time that affects people's property value. You know, from placement to a road to where, you know, a park's going to be, all those things affect property value. Your property value changes, it goes down sometimes. Okay, how about this? If you approve this, my property value will go down, and I have an appraiser here who will give you all the data to show that if you approve apartment buildings, my property value will go down.
Still won't have a record.
It would have, wouldn't they have to have showing that it would be beyond the reasonable amount? Like it goes to zero?
That's first, yeah. I mean, that's very good. That's very astute of you, okay? How much your property value goes down is a big part of it, okay? So say the appraiser is going to come and testify that if you approve this, my property value is going to be zero. And he's going to use data. He's going to use facts to do that. Is that clamor or evidence? Evidence. It's evidence. However, is it relevant? It's not. It's not relevant evidence. So even if you provide evidence, you still, the responsibility is to weigh that evidence, okay? For applicability, relevance, all those things. And even if you have two pieces of evidence, right, that are equally relevant and equally applicable, and one leads to yes and one leads to no, okay, you're still picking. You're still choosing one, right? You're choosing one and you're disregarding the other. And guess what? You're good because you base it on some evidence. It doesn't have to be more evidence or better evidence. It doesn't have to be, more persuasive evidence. You can have this much evidence for yes and this much evidence for no, and you can say no. Because all it has to do is be backed by evidence, right? So if you don't want apartments or whatever else you want, right, and you come to city council meeting because you want to express that you don't want apartments, that's what you need to keep in mind. First of all, okay, the only question is, does this comply with our ordinances? Okay? And the only thing that you can really do, and this is actually very helpful, but the thing that you need to do is provide evidence, facts and data to show that it doesn't comply with our ordinances. Evidence. Okay? I'll just illustrate with one more way, and this is from a case. Okay? They wanted to build like a Home Depot kind of facility with a big outdoor lumber yard out in West Jordan. And next door to that was Dannon Yogurt. Okay? And they were considering whether or not to allow this. Okay? And Dannon came to the meeting. And they said, we can't have this because lumber yards attract mice and rats. And if we have mice and rats right next to our sterile food production facility, we're gonna get shut down. We can't have this. So you're the court, right? And this is the evidence you've been presented with, okay? What do you decide? Clamor or evidence? The court held that was clamor. You don't know that this lumberyard will to attract mice. Matter of fact, you haven't even provided any evidence that lumberyards attract mice. Right? I mean, you just said, hey, lumberyards attract mice, right? That's just the same as saying, hey, children will die.
That's the same thing as saying, as you build this development, it's gonna increase crime.
Yep.
Or increase traffic, or
School overcrowding.
Or,
But you have
whatever
to
it is.
prove it with the studies, the
Water
traffic
pressure.
studies and the school studies.
Yeah.
But even if you provide that evidence that says, I've got the traffic study that says there's gonna be 483 apartments, each with 1.7 cars, that's gonna be X cars, X more traffic on the road. You provided evidence of more traffic, but you haven't provided evidence that it's not compliant with the ordinance. So
Correct.
it doesn't really matter, even though that is evidence.
Correct. And so that makes that evidence irrelevant. That's why that evidence is not relevant. Right? Now, if you were to provide evidence, say you had a noise ordinance in your town, okay? And somebody came along and was gonna build, say, a grocery store. I mean, I'm just shooting at anything here, okay? And the neighbors would come, they don't want, they're concerned because they live right out behind the grocery store, the trucks will come in and out in the night, loading and unloading, okay? So you can't allow this. It violates our ordinances, our noise ordinances, okay? So you have to say no to that because it violates our ordinances because they're gonna make so much noise, okay? Well, in that case, they've brought up an ordinance, right? It might be violated, okay? But they still have to have data to prove that that ordinance is going to get violated. So they have to be able to show that those trucks are going to be, above that decibel level. So that's what you do. So as a public, that's your job with those kind of things. Again, when it comes to the legislative side, the zoning side, changing the zoning, getting rid of mixed uses, all that kind of stuff, all your input is welcome. Even, you see each other at the store or church or wherever, and you want to tell your guy what you think, great. You can pull them aside, you can send them a text, all that kind of stuff, because whatever, they need to know what you want, okay? Because that's a discretionary decision, okay? But an administrative decision, when they're talking about an application, okay, they need evidence that what they're deciding isn't in compliance with the law, right? And so coming here and saying children will die, this is horrible, it will stink, it will be noisy, it will be ugly, clamor. That's all clamor. Yes.
So, how do you make public hearings more effective then? Because it seems to me that the majority of what we get at public hearings is clamor.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone's angry
Yeah.
because we didn't listen to the clamor. Is there a way to help that whole process?
Yes. The first question you want to ask is you want to ask yourself, when do we actually want to have public hearings?
Well, you can't do that legally, can you?
Absolutely.
Because we would probably say.
Listen, in the state law, there is only one time when you actually have to hold a public hearing. And that's at the Planning Commission for a legislative decision. That's the only time you have to hold a public hearing in the state law. There is no requirement that you ever hold a public hearing for an administrative decision. You do not have to hold a public hearing for a conditional use. You do not have to hold a public hearing for a building permit. You do not have to hold a public hearing for a subdivision. None of those things. You are not obligated to hold a public hearing. Now, your local ordinances may say you have to have a public hearing for like a conditional use permit. Okay? But as we talked about, you can change that. Okay? And so the first question is, when do we want to hold public hearings? Now, sometimes it's great to hold public hearings. Sometimes they're helpful, right? Because somebody might come to a public hearing with evidence. Okay? Also, if you say no more public hearings, they might really stone your house. Okay? There's that to consider, right? There's political issues, right? But you got to understand that you get to ask yourself that question. First of all, when do we want to hold public hearings? And I'll tell you, in my opinion, the best run cities are very selective about when they hold public hearings. The best run cities do not have public hearings at all for routine matters or simple matters.
Such as?
Home businesses. Things where you know what the concerns are going to be. You know what the concerns are going to be. Small subdivision, right? A subdivision in a subdivision that conforms with the general plan. It's conforming. Why hold a public hearing? And you can make that decision yourself, whether to hold public hearings every time, but I think the best run places are selective about it. They will hold public hearings when there's reason to believe that the public is really going to want to say something and really going to be able to provide evidence to influence the decision, and something besides climate.
So changing the zoning or the general map, does that require it, or that's just a legislative, we can decide not to?
The mixed-use zone here, big deal, right? I would hold a public hearing on that, okay? Because if you don't, people will probably go nuts.
But like the general plan.
Well, that's a zoning question. That was a bad example, because that's a zoning question. Let's go back to the apartments example, okay? Somebody wants to put in, say, a 6-unit apartment building in a place that it's planned for that, zoned for that, and they want to put that in, right? Why hold a public hearing? You know what's going to happen, okay? If someone's going to come in with a 200-unit apartment building, people might be a lot more concerned about that. You might want to hear if anybody has any evidence, so you might decide to hold a public hearing for that. Understand what I'm saying? It's up to you guys, but there's no requirement that you hold public hearings. And the places that don't, when they decide to get rid of some of the public hearings, they usually come up with public.
Individuals coming into this public hearing about the apartments is just a clamor of how they don't want it. Now, if we get 4,000 residents to sign a petition with their address and come in, is that evidence that there is a large percentage of the city that doesn't want this? We want to persuade you, city, to reevaluate what you're doing.
It's evidence of that. It's evidence that there's a large percentage of the city that don't want it, right? And they want to persuade you. Okay? It's evidence of that. But that evidence is completely 100% irrelevant.
That's why elections are.
You do not vote on.
Well, no, but the representatives that you have in city council.
Yeah, you don't vote on administrative things especially. You don't vote on them, okay? Because there's no discretion. Like I said, it's all about that. So every single person in town can say, no, I don't want this, okay? But if it's allowed in the zone, the guy gets to do it. The million people in town, what they need to do is they need to talk to people about getting the zone changed, so it's no longer allowed. That's when they have influence.
So, I just want to clarify, that I'm understanding you correctly. So you talk about the apartments and then you talk about zoning. So say there's 4,000 people that don't want a zone to be changed. It's just clamor, even if they come forth with information as well, same thing.
Because, like I said, that's a legislative decision, okay? So you can listen to that. It's not clamor. There's no concern about clamor with the legislative decision. So yeah, 4,000 people don't want the zone changed. The council can listen to that and make that decision because of that.
So they're not.
It's different planning commission versus the city council.
Yeah, that's what I.
No, it's not. Okay? If the city council has a reason to think that 4,000 people don't want the zone changed, it's a legislative decision. It's discretionary, which means that the city council can say, we're going to say no to the zone change because 4,000 people don't want it. You can say that because it's legislative. It's a discretionary thing. And on the planning commission level, you're just making a recommendation, but you're still using legislative discretion to do it. Okay? For an administrative decision, 4,000 people or 4 million people not wanting it to happen is utterly irrelevant because that's clamor.
Because that's just.
So you don't worry about clamor with a legislative decision. Remember, a legislative decision changes the law. It changes the zone, or it amends an ordinance, or it changes the plan. Those are legislative. You don't worry about clamor. You only worry about clamor with an administrative decision, which is where you apply the law. It's where an application somebody comes to an application to actually build an apartment or put in a pet cemetery or have a mixed-use development or whatever.
So as you go around doing this, do you find that a lot of cities are in the same situation as West Haven is, where they had public hearings and they had different things and they had open houses and whatever to talk about how the city wanted to lay out and the zones and the plan and the general plan, and you get very little citizen input until that guy comes in with the application and then they say, oh, we don't want that here, that can't come here, but they didn't bother to come to the open houses and voice their opinion until after the fact.
Every place I go. It's the same every place I go.
So how do you fix that one?
I don't know. If I could fix it, I would. But, you know, that's how it's set up. It's set up so you have you have the zoning discretion, and that's when citizen input is most vital. And
So it's after the fact, and then everybody said, we're going to vote you off city council because you don't listen to us, even though they're adhering to the laws that were set forth by the citizens for electing that city council who voted on it. Basically.
Yeah. I mean, people will come and they'll scream and yell at you, and you have to have evidence to make that decision. And the decision is, does it comply? And that's all there is to it. But this is not a thing that's unique to Utah. That's how our elected form of government works, right? We tell our representatives what to have for the speed limit, right? And they make a decision, they pass a law for the speed limit, okay? You don't get to come and say, don't enforce 60 miles an hour when you got caught driving 80, right? You just have, if you pay a ticket if you met the law, and you don't pay a ticket if you didn't meet the law, okay? You don't get to say, this is all unfair at that time. You just either met the law or you didn't. It's the same. It's the same. You get to have input, citizens get to have input when you're making the law, okay? Once the law is made, it's the law. And citizens have to comply with it, and the city has to comply with it. It's not unique. It's nothing new.
So while we're on the subject of public hearings, where's the best place for that public hearing to occur on legislative issues? Should that take place during the planning commission meetings or during the city council meetings where the decision to approve or disapprove or implement that is made?
You have to hold one at the planning commission meeting. You have to. Most places I know also hold one at the city council meeting, but it's not required. I don't think there's any harm in that. Matter of fact, it's probably a good thing to hold a public hearing at that point too. If it's uncomplicated, you cannot hold one and save yourselves a lot of time, right? A lot of headache. But you're not required to at the council stage. But you have to hold one at the planning commission stage. Again, that's for legislative only. Does somebody have an agenda for tonight?
Right here.
Okay, so we're going to have one more quiz. I'm going to read through what was on tonight's agenda, and I want you guys to tell me if it was legislative or administrative. Final subdivision approval, Guzman subdivision. Why was it administrative? Were you changing the law?
No.
No. Very good. Action on public hearing master development agreement. Administrative. All right, you weren't changing the law, right? Let's see. Final site plan approval. Site plan. Kenworth Sales.
Administrative.
Conditional use for a mechanic shop. Action on public hearing storage container ordinance. That's legislative. You had a public hearing about changing the ordinance, right? And so you were trying to decide if you were finalized and ready to send it up. Okay, you're using the legislative discretion on that. And so if anybody had actually come to the public hearing to tell you what they thought, you can consider that. You can think about that. And you can ignore it or whatever, but you can do what you want. But with all the other ones, you know, they were or they are now. I will say this, and it's gonna, I hope you don't take it too much as a criticism. But the Planning Commission is supposed to spend their time planning. A lot of planning commissions have agendas like this every time, and that's where 90% of their meeting is administrative things. Right? A lot of planning commissions are like that. That is not your job, planning commission. Your planning commission's job is to plan, which means you should be spending probably more than 50% of your time, planning commission, on legislative things, on the general plan, on the ordinances, on the zoning, you know, on the details in the ordinances, on just the little things. Do we want this use here? Is this worded quite right? Can we word it a little better? All those kinds of things. To make your ordinances better, right? To steer the city, to make the city into more what you want. Now, is there anything wrong with doing administrative stuff as a planning commission? No, it's not, okay? But that's not your job. Your job is to plan, right? So think about that. Think about how you can find a better balance, because here's the thing. If you make your ordinances better, you're going to have a lot easier time with your administrative decisions. They're going to be a lot easier, because your ordinances are going to say what you got to do. And then the person's going to come in and they're going to know exactly what you got to do. And it's going to be easy. You're just going to say, oh, you did all those things? Great. You're in. You get to do it. Right? It's a constant, updating your ordinance is a constant effort. And it's not, it doesn't just happen when people are clamoring and stuff like that. It's like, hey, you know what? I noticed that our noise ordinance, we don't have a noise ordinance. We should talk about one. Let's put one in. Hey, you know, I think that maybe we don't want pet cemeteries in our residential zones. So let's take that out. Those are the kind of things that should be taking up a lot of the planning commission's time.
So then are you recommending that those administrative land use issues be taken on by the city council rather than the planning commission?
No. Quite to the contrary. The city council has enough to do too, and that presents a whole new world of problems. What I'm recommending is that if there are things that can be shed from the planning commission, that they be shed. I know a lot of places with really routine stuff, you know, we talked about that a little bit, they have the staff make those decisions. You know, and I'm not saying that's what's best for you guys, but I'm saying that that's how it's supposed to work. Okay, you're supposed to take up the public's time and the public's effort for things that are important and that matter, and not neglecting the planning aspect of the job. And there's a lot of places I know that have completely given up public hearings for administrative things. I'm not saying you should do that. I really think that's okay, but it's not the best. There's a lot of places that have given all of their administrative things to staff and had their planners plan full time. I'm not saying you should do that either. I mean, that's great. But I think you should think about it. What's the best way to do this here to maximize our efficiency, maximize the way we do things, and make sure that we're doing things in accordance with the law. Sir?
If you answered this already, I apologize. I haven't really forgotten my last video. You answered this, so don't
You're fine.
But
we've met before anyway. You've heard everything I
in my opinion, most of our discussion debate takes place regarding legislative issues, and most of those, as you know, you mentioned this, regarding mixed use. So you mentioned that most of the successful cities that you see don't hold public hearings
for administrative things, or they're selected for
administrative things, right? Of which we held several of those tonight for administrative things. So 2 questions.
Yeah.
First, do most of the successful cities that you work with have some form of a mixed use ordinance, or do they try to avoid it? And second question regarding that is, if you have a mixed use ordinance that's really up to interpretation, what then is administrative? If you're trying to figure out how it's interpreted to know what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Great question. Fantastic question. And the answer to the first question is yes, I do think most places have some form of mixed use ordinance. And I can't tell you how different or dissimilar it is to yours, because I haven't read yours. Right? But most places, they'll have a PUD ordinance or something. Right?
Do you consider that a mixed use? Because we have PUDs also.
Sometimes, because it depends on how it's structured, right? You know, because a PUD, planned unit development, that means that you can have, you know, in a lot of places, that means you can have commercial and residential in the same place. You can mix uses. And then, you know, what you call it is one thing. How it works is what really matters. But I'd say most places have some kind of ordinance where the possibility exists of mixing uses. Your second question, which is excellent, takes a little bit of a deeper answer. The objective, really, is to take out subjectivity as much as possible. Okay? To make it so that everyone knows what to expect. Everyone knows what can happen here and can't happen there. Everyone knows that if you want to do these things, you have to do A to L. You have to do all those things if you want to do a particular thing in a particular area, right? And you put those in your ordinances, right? And the better you do at that, right, the more settled things are, the more predictable things are, the less work you all have to do, the less headaches there are, and the less liable you are for lawsuits. You know, because people will sue you because they say, hey, you interpreted this wrong or whatever, right? So subjectivity, you know, removing subjectivity is the objective. And when I talk to planning commissions and I say, you should be working on your ordinances, that's a major thing you should be working on, is removing as much subjectivity as they can. But like you mentioned, okay, things like mixed-use ordinances, PUDs and stuff like that, depending on how they're used, are sort of based on subjectivity. And the reason why they're used is because sometimes you want flexibility. Sometimes you want flexibility. Sometimes you want to say, well, you know, I can see in this particular area, I can see several things working, right? So let's see what the developer thinks they want to do, right? And we'll sort of place some subjectivity into that, okay? That brings you that creativity, that ability, and it does have a lot of subjectivity, and so it does feel like, to a large extent, a lot of legislative decisions are being made, and they probably are for that particular use, okay? But it has all the downsides that we talked about. You know, it's higher exposure to lawsuits. It's, you know, less predictable. You know, people don't know what to expect. The neighbors don't know what's going to happen. You know, people can't really give input, a lot of input, very well because there's just not a lot of predictability, right? So, while the goal is subjectivity, there are certain circumstances where that kind of flexibility is good, okay? But flexibility just for flexibility's sake isn't necessarily what you want. You want a reason to do that. And if you don't have a reason to do it and you want to get rid of your mixed-use zone, do it. Great, right? Now again, I don't know how your mixed-use zone exactly works and everything, but, you know, seems like the people that I've talked to who want to get rid of the mixed-use zone, that's one of the major problems is they don't like the idea of people being able to do various things and mixing things up and having all these kinds of, you know, variable densities and all that kind of stuff. Things that are usually legislative decisions. You know, saying that we're going to have density between 1 unit per acre and 10 units per acre, and we're just going to decide, that should be a legislative decision. You know, you should be saying, we're going to say our density here is 5 units per acre. So, you're so awesome. So, that's the long answer to your question.
Perfect, thank you.
You know, you can do that if you want to. It just prevents problems sometimes when you do. And you really should be making a lot of those kinds of decisions legislatively.
So within that, you have a zone that allows 5 to 9 units, and the developer comes in and shows your plans, says, I want 8. Can the council just say, well, we don't think that fits, try again?
See, that's the problem, okay? If the zoning says 5 to 9, and a guy comes in and he wants 9, okay? He's going to give you all the reasons why he should get 9, okay? And you're going to say, no, I don't like 9 there. I want 5, okay? If I was him, the first thing I'd do is I'd sue you, right? Because I give you all the good reasons to have 9, and you give me no good reason to have 5, right? So say you had some good reason to have 5, right? Well, you know, that doesn't necessarily eliminate him wanting to sue you. That doesn't necessarily eliminate these kinds of problems. If you didn't want 9, why did you say 5 to 9? Right? And the neighbors are always going to want the 5. Okay? So why did you even say 5 to 9 in the first place if you were not going to approve 9? That's the problem. And that's why I just don't like those. I just don't like them because if it says 5 and the guy comes in with 9, yes, say no. You're even throwing rocks. So I don't like them.
Well, what we're talking mixed use, what do you think of an ordinance that would require homeowners purchasing a lot next to commercial or industrial areas within 300 feet of that to have a sound engineer involved in the method and material used in the construction of the home?
Wow. You have to be careful about that. This is getting into some pretty, 400 level land use stuff. But your ability to create ordinances is based on the police power. The city's ability is based on the police power. That is the power to make sure that the citizens have adequate health, safety, and welfare. That's the phrase, health, safety, and welfare. Okay? So anything you do, you really have to be able to connect to health, safety, and welfare. Okay? When you're talking about the setbacks of a house from the road, you can say that you can connect that to health, safety, and welfare because it's too close to the road, you might get accident, right? But when you're talking about the color of the building, right? How do you say that we want all of our buildings to be brown? How do you connect that to health, safety, and welfare? Well, there's kind of an aesthetic thing, and that sort of welfare kind of aesthetic, but it gets really weak, okay? When it talks about when you're talking about what somebody has inside their building, inside their house, inside the house you have to have a 2-car garage. Or inside the house, you have to have an upstairs bathroom. Okay? How do you connect that with health, safety, and welfare? You're telling people what they need to have inside their house. That's not a public health issue, right? So you're saying, you want people that are right next to a commercial area to do certain things. You have to be able to connect that to health, safety, and welfare. And when those things are like the kind of insulation you have to have, you're really treading on thin ice.
So what about saying, hey, Mr. Developer, this is A1, and it was agricultural, you want to come and put in houses there now, so you have to rezone. We'll approve your rezone, but as a condition of that rezone, because we know that's a noise-generating area, because there's a history behind that, we're going to make you put up a sound wall in order to protect the citizens from that environment that you're building next to.
That question is another 400 level question. And the first way I have to answer that question is you have to understand that it's illegal to do conditional rezones. You either have to rezone it or you can't, or you don't rezone it, okay? But having said that, if you want to say, we will be persuaded to change your zone if you will do X, like put up a sound wall, we're not persuaded to change your zone. And Brent Bateman told us that we have to be persuaded. We're not persuaded. But if you put up that sound wall, we probably will be persuaded. Okay? You can probably do that, but that is the kind of thing that makes good stories. Right? And what I mean by that is you always have to think about what is going to happen if someone takes what you told them to their local legislator. Right? Because legislation runs on stories, you don't tell here. Legislation runs on stories, right? And people go to the legislators and they tell the legislator a story, and the legislators get very upset, and then they change the state law that takes away the ability of the local jurisdiction from doing what they want to do. And it happens all the time. Every year, some developer or somebody went to the legislature and said such and such a city said it had to do this. And the legislator said, what? He said you had to put in a sound wall? That's so expensive. Okay, no. And so they passed a law that says cities can no longer tell people they can put in sound walls. So you also have to think about that.
But if the homeowner goes and says they're going to require me to have a sound engineer, what's the legislator going to say how you want to say?
What do you mean, what's the legislator going to say?
I don't know, is he going to have the same outrage as just expressing?
Legislators do, man. I don't know if the legislator's going to care or if he's not going to care. But that's how stories, that's how that kind of thing happens.
I guess I would think that it's just as easy to write the ordinance that would require a mixed-use development next to a commercial to have a sound wall as it would to require a citizen to have a sound engineer involved in the construction of their home.
Sound walls are ridiculously expensive. So that's why that becomes a good story. Having a sound engineer, would cost way less than a sound wall. But at the same time, again, you're running into that, telling people what they're going to do inside their house, not related to health, safety, and welfare. So it's, it's a bubble, but it's pretty deep.
Part of the ordinance to require that as you build, is that still?
Yeah, I mean, you're always talking about going too far, right? And I've already explained you go too far with some things, and you violated the Constitution, violated the takings clause. And the other part I'm saying is, even if you haven't violated the takings clause, even if you're fine, which an ordinance like that sounds like it might be fine legally, but it makes a story. That's the thing. So even though it's legal, doesn't mean you should, just because you can't do something doesn't mean you should. Because, that's how cities lose their ability to make rules. That's why we have bills sometimes that say things like, a city can no longer tell people whether or not they can have bees. Which is an actual bill that was introduced a couple years ago. Why was that introduced? Because somebody wanted to put bees, and the city said no. And they went to their legislator. The legislator said you should be allowed to have bees. So they passed the law, saying the city can no longer tell you can't have bees. So just because you can do something, you should always think about the story. Very great. And sound walls in particular make a good story because those things are thousands of dollars a foot. Are we having fun? Is everybody's brain full?
So maybe a better strategy would not to allow residential, but lighter commercial as a buffer between those kinds of things and residential.
And that's the thing. There's a lot of things you can do. A lot of things you can do. And including you can just allow, a lot of places allow residential right next to commercial, and it just, it is what it is. If people don't want to buy that house, they can go buy a different house. I mean, we don't have to regulate every single aspect of a person's life. Where's the clock? Over there. What do you think? Any more? Yeah.
One more. Again, I think back to this, just done. Next to again, I liked your first answer, so I hesitate to ask this.
You're fine.
But we've zoned something mixed use.
Yep.
So it's done.
Yep.
Now, our mixed use is fairly subjective. So it's up to a lot of interpretation. But let's say for this particular mixed use is residential and commercial.
Okay.
Seems like developers always want to come in and put in residential.
There's more money there.
Commercial is kind of an afterthought, or
So residential goes in, naturally the commercial is left vacant, which really allows some other developer to come in and say, hey, that's mixed use, I'd like to put high-density housing in there too, so it's all there. So what's the city's, and I'm assuming this is more administrative, but what's the city's ability now to say, okay, developer A, you came in first, you said you were going to do mixed use and you want commercial and residential. We want to entice you or encourage you or mandate that you put commercial in as part of this mixed use.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I've not answered it. I don't think you have the ability to mandate it. Okay, you have mixed use, right? But each developer comes in under those same rules. So this developer comes in and gets an approval. This developer comes in, he gets an approval, right? And the developer shouldn't have to do, what they do based on what somebody else.
I'm talking the same developer in this example. The developer came in and he said, I'm going to put housing and commercial in.
Okay, let me answer that this way then. At the very beginning, I said that you can do what you want with your land. The exception is local ordinances, okay? Which means that if something is not in the local ordinances, right, the developer gets to choose what it is, what happens, because they get to do what they want in the land, because the exception didn't apply. The exception of your local ordinances didn't apply. So if it's compliant with that zone to do 100% residential, if it's compliant, well, if it's not, then it isn't. But you got to understand too, okay, that because of this rule that I'm telling you about how zoning is the exception to the rule, okay, because of that, tie goes to the developer always. Tie always goes to the developer.
So it goes back to your original answer that hey, make your mixed use non-subjective.
That's why that's better, okay? If something is subject to two interpretations, if it can be interpreted reasonably that way and reasonably that way, the tie always goes to the developer.
Okay. Always. Thank you.
But
Go ahead.
on that ordinance, when that ordinance is made, that on the mixed use, that this part of that rezone, this is housing, this is the residential portion. And this part is the commercial portion, and that is what the ordinance says. Then you created an ordinance that says, then someone can't come back in and take that commercial piece in your mixed use and change and just say he's going to do another mixed use of having residential on that.
If your ordinances say that, if your ordinance says, because you're talking then about having two zones, you're talking about spot zoning, which is legal.
Right,
That. But your zoning here says residential, your zoning there says commercial.
No. Mixed use.
No, that's what our ordinance.
That's what your ordinance says.
In an ordinance, for example, we've done an ordinance, well, there was some property that was going to be rezoned up there, half of it, part of it was going to be apartments, and this part was delineated as commercial. That stays commercial, and that's how the ordinance is written, and how that's in the actual ordinance shows a map of that and shows that delineation. So to me, that stays commercial back then. Because that's how it's zoned.
I don't like it, but I think you're right. And the reason why I don't like it is because there's still a level of subjectivity. Okay? And there's a good argument that you really zone those two different ways. It's a mixed-use zone, but you've designated this area as one thing, and designated this as another thing. There's a good argument that that's two different zonings. Okay? But as long as your ordinance is designated a certain way, then that's the ordinance. Right? You've got to live with that.
So with that, then, in our history, the residential always goes in, and the commercial always sits vacant. So in essence, the developer came in and brought up identity housing, nothing more. Reserving that for commercial for 20, 25, 30-year build out.
Sure. It's his land.
flawed ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, it's his land, he can build what he wants on his land.
Not if our ordinance says you have to have both.
Yeah, but your ordinance can't say that you have to build.
So how do you resolve that then? So you don't end up with a lot of high density houses?
Take the subjectivity out of your ordinance.
Okay.
But how does that help, okay? Because if you take the subjectivity out of your ordinance and you say residential here, commercial here, right? Well, who knows when the residential is gonna come and knows when the commercial is gonna come. You still can't force people to do it.
Right.
So that's what you're stuck with. I mean, you know, how development progresses is unpredictable. It's random and it's unpredictable, right? And that's one of the reasons why we talked about changing the general plan and maybe not always following the general plan, because it's unpredictable. But you don't know when this guy's going to do anything.
But again, in your example where you suggested that, okay, zone commercial and zone residential, you still can't tell when that's going to happen, but it prevents, because if you have a 10-acre parcel and 5 of it you've said is, well, there's never really a line on ours, there's kind of a, well, okay, there has been a line on it in the past. A line on it says, okay, 5 acres is residential, and we're going to designate 5 as commercial.
Yeah.
And then everybody's thumbs up, and then it comes back with, well, we're actually going to have 7 of this be residential and 3 of it be commercial. That's where zoning commercial and residential would take that subjectivity out of it.
Yeah. I mean, you could always do a development agreement, right? And a development agreement is a contract, it's not an ordinance, right? And you can always do a development agreement with a guy that says, that has a time frame, you're going to build this here, and this then, and this then, and this then, and this here, and all that kind of stuff. You can always do that. And that's a way to probably get to where you want to be, where you have some high density and some commercial right near it, right? Through a development agreement.
But if you do mixed use, do you have, it's the landowner's property then?
Yeah.
Does what he or she says, I don't want to do a development agreement, I'm just doing.
If they don't want to do a development agreement, then they get to do what the underlying zoning says.
Right. Yeah. So.
But if it's part of the ordinance, they would have to do a master development agreement.
No, not really. And the reason why is because in order to be a development agreement, you actually have to have it be an arm's length agreement. People have to willingly enter into it. When you tell people you have to enter an agreement, they're not really entering into an agreement. That's not really a contract. You're forcing them to contract with you, and that's not arm's length. That's not willing buyer, willing seller. So ordinances that say you have to enter a development agreement, they don't work.
I got a question. So in discussing those issues with regard to land use and what people can and can't do, often hear things like farmers have the right to sell their property. The market's going to determine what'll get built. So what role does landowner profit, developer profit play in, or should play in the city putting together their ordinances and their general plan? Profit and market, what are the current market forces and whatnot?
Profit doesn't play any role, but preference does. Okay? Like I said, you can make any rule, any zone, you can tell people, you know, you can only have residential here, commercial here, and it has to look like this and all this kind of stuff. You can do that. Okay? The fact that that's not profitable doesn't make it a taking. Okay? The fact that I can't do that because I can't make that pencil out doesn't make it a taking. I can still do it. Okay? But preference is huge. Okay? As long as what they're doing complies with the zoning, right? They get to do it how they want to do it. Okay? So if you set up these rules, and let me also say this, let me also take a step back. You can consider profit, however, just like you can consider anything else in a legislative decision. You can consider whether or not the person will make money. You can consider anything when you're talking about making a legislative decision. Okay? But people don't have a right to make a profit, right? And just because they can't make a profit doesn't mean that you are taking their property as long as they can do something, as long as it didn't go too far. But if you have not said they can't do something, they can. Because their underlying right is to do what I want with my property. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, it seems like the intent of the general plan is to lay out the vision and the future of the city rather than making sure that landowners get the most profit. For instance, I have enough property that if I had the same density as Sycamore Lane development, I could put 8 apartments in my backyard, but I can't do that. So shouldn't I have the right to maximize the profit on that?
Nobody has the right to maximize their profit. If the city chooses to have their zoning be in a way that maximizes people's profit, they can. But if they choose to have their zoning in a way that doesn't maximize people's profit, they can do that too. Right? I mean, you have a right to do something with your land, something productive. You have the right to do something productive with your land. But you don't have to make people rich, but you don't have to stop you from making people rich. You can make that decision at a time. You can decide how important property values are to you and to the different areas, and you can make zoning that allows people to do things and allows people to not do things. So it's as far as legislative decisions goes, it's part of consideration. Make that part of consideration.
But coming back to our discussion earlier on the TIP funds, cities are not, I mean, they're going to have to adhere to a certain level of low-income housing in order to meet the criteria to get the federal funds. Doesn't that imply that we're going to turn part of this land into, and I know low income doesn't mean high density, but let's assume that it does. We're going to have to turn part of our community into low income housing in order to get those federal funds to build our infrastructure. Right?
Well, first of all,
so it's unavoidable.
You have to pick 3 of the things. Okay, there's no accounting for results. Okay, they don't actually have to result in that, right? Hopefully they will. So the way I'm going to answer your question is that yes, you should. You should have some plan in place for low-income housing, and use 3 of those things to try to make that happen. Okay, if for some reason it doesn't happen, I don't think they're going to take away the TIF funds. It's not a results-oriented thing, right? But yeah, you should. Every place should. Every place should. You can't just say, hey, Ogden can have all the poor people and we're going to have all the rich people. You can't do it. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to do it. And the problem is that everyone in the state will say that. Poor Ogden, already has enough problems.
And don't get me wrong, my position is not against low-income housing in West Haven. I'm trying to understand.
There's as far as low-income housing goes, guys, there's a cycle, okay? People want to live here, okay? So people move here, but even more influential than that is in Utah, we did one thing really well, and that's have babies, right? Okay? And that's the concern, is where are all those kids going to live? And you have kids right now who are in college or just graduated from college who are living with mom and dad because they can't get a place right now, right? And then you have the people who work in hotels and gas stations, right? They can't get a place and end up having to drive 50 miles from the place where they can get it out here, so that they can work, right? And we want those people here to work, right? I don't see any of us volunteering to do any of those jobs, right? So, it just makes sense. I mean, there's become this crunch where these people just don't have any place where they can live, right? With these low-income jobs and these low-income things, and while they're trying to build up their careers and stuff like that, okay? And it's perfectly natural to say, you know what, we don't want them here. Let them go to Ogden or let them go somewhere else. But that's what everybody says that, and that's why there's a problem. Everybody says that. And so the whole point of that statute was to make sure that everybody takes some responsibility to do something about it. And whether that's density or some other thing on that list, that's what they decided to do, because it's out of control.
So while you're
right behind you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So our general planning that has been done.
Yep.
Should be done in such a way that it gives us a planned community.
Correct.
With putting areas in places where they're easy accessible and stuff. So if you're like low income housing, I know my home community did it like they had business, then they went into apartments, then they went into duplexes, then into housing. They separated it, they planned it out, and then they did their planning that way.
There's a lot of planning theory, that college professors and stuff discuss about, but generally what you're saying is correct. You create a plan for your community, you create areas in your community where things work, and you do have places in your community where you have large lots, and stuff like that. You have those, and no one says you have to get rid of those, but you plan for all the needs of your community, and you put that in your general plan. And then you're not having to reinvent the wheel, then you're controlling growth. Because if you just, imagine what would happen if you just let growth happen as it happens, the developers would be in charge, right? And like we talked about, they're out for whatever maximizes the buck, And so that's the thing you can control is the plan of what goes where. But you have to be, a smart plan has all those kinds of good things, things next to things and the right thing over here and the right thing over here and all that kind of stuff.
So how often would you suggest that you open up your general plan and make changes?
Often is a difficult word to say better than regularly. You just need to recognize, you need to think about where growth is likely to happen next. Okay? And you look at that place and you think, okay, this is what our plan said for that place. Does that still work? Is that still the right thing for that area? Right? But you don't try to eat the whole elephant, You take the elephant one bite at a time, right? And the same goes for your code. You don't try to make your code the world's greatest code overnight, right? Take it one bite at a time. And you're constantly trying to get it better. But if you're doing that, it'll circle around and you'll do something for the general plan over here, and it'll come back around, and then you'll have to relook at this area and relook at this area. It's constant because growth happens unpredictably, and you have to respond to it. So regularly is the answer.
So when you say regularly, for example, every few months would be much more regular than every 2 years, 5 years.
If there's a place in your community that is growing or likely to grow a lot, then you're looking at that a lot. If there's a place in your community that is not likely to be touched, then you don't have to look at that very often. So that's why the best answer I give is regularly. Just got to kind of keep up on it.
Another question. So, mother-in-law apartments, you said that was one of the things. So what happens if a subdivision has a CCR that says no mother-in-law apartments, but the city decides that mother-in-law apartments is a good way to get low-income housing? Who prevails?
That's a great question. CCNRs, first of all, don't be in the business of enforcing CCNRs as a city. Between the homeowners association and the homeowner. Okay? So it's a contract. So if you want to say a certain area is, has mother-in-law apartments, right? And in that place they have CCNRs that don't allow them, right? You have the law, but they have a contract, right? So they've got to meet that contract. The contract says they have to do something. You're just saying that they can do something. See what I'm saying? And so they've got to live with that contract. There's no reason why homeowner associations can be problematic. For a decade or so ago, we thought they were the answer to everything, and now nobody wants them anymore. It's 9 o'clock.
Move to adjourn. So I'm looking at Title 10, Chapter 9, 403A that talks about those three of the 20 23 strategies.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't mention that being tied to TIF funds. Is there someplace else?
It's in there.
It's in the state or?
It's in the state code, yeah. Okay, guys, thank you.